distance and maritime choke points are hardly the only geopolitical factors. So too are latitude, elevation, humidity, temperature, surface angle, wind speed, wind reliability, solar radiation, and seasonal weather variation. Just as different geographic features impact deep-water navigation and industrialization differently, or manufacturing and finance differently, so too do they impact green tech and conventional power generation differently. And if the tech is of varying usefulness based on location, then there are relative winners and losers, just as there are with deep-water transport or industrialization or oil. Me personally, I used to live in Austin, and now reside just outside Denver. I've put up solar systems on both homes. In hot, sunny Texas, I recouped my investment in under 8 years. It'll likely take less time living in Colorado. Denver is the United States' sunniest metro area, and at high altitude there is no humidity and very little air to block sunlight. I'm absolutely a believer in the technology when it's matched to the correct geography. Most parts of the world are neither very windy nor very sunny. Eastern Canada and Northern and Central Europe are cloud-bound for more than 9 months of the year on average, in addition to having painfully short winter days. No one goes to Florida or northern Brazil to kiteboard. The eastern two-thirds of China, the vast bulk of India, and nearly the entirety of Southeast Asia, home to fully half the world's population, have so little solar and wind potential that a large-scale green tech build-out would emit more carbon than it would ever save. Same for West Africa, and the Northern Andes, and the more populated portions of the former Soviet Union, and Ontario. Zones for which today's green tech makes both environmental and economic sense comprise less than 1/5 of the land area of the populated continents, most of which is far removed from our major population centers. Think Patagonia for wind, or the Outback for solar. The unfortunate fact is that green tech in its current form simply isn't useful for most people in most places, either to reduce carbon emissions or to provide a substitute for energy inputs in a more chaotic post-order world. I live in a rural area, and my home sprawls accordingly. I've got a 10-kilowatt solar system, which covers the majority of my south and west-facing roof lines and generates sufficient power for nearly all my needs. But what if I lived in a city? A smaller roof line means less room for panels. What if I lived in an apartment? My roof would be a shared space whose panels need to feed multiple units. What if I lived in a high-rise? Minimal roof space, lots of people drawing upon very few panels. Fossil fuels are so concentrated that they are literally energy in physical form. In contrast, all green techs require space. Solar is the worst of the bunch. It is roughly 1,000 times less dense than systems powered by more conventional means. Consider America's megalopolis, the line of densely packed cities from Boston in the north to the greater DC area in the south. Collectively, the coastal cities of this line comprise roughly 1/3 of the American population on a tiny footprint. They also happen to be positioned on patches of land with very low solar and wind potential. The idea they could generate sufficient volumes of electricity locally is asinine. They need to import it. The closest zone with reasonably good solar potential, not good, reasonably good, is South Central Virginia. That's an inconvenient 600 miles away from Boston, and Boston would be last in line for sips of electricity after DC, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York City, Hartford, and Providence. It isn't simply an issue for cities located in cloudy, still locations. It's a problem for cities everywhere. Every technological development that has brought us to our industrialized, urbanized present must be reevaluated to make today's green tech work. But by far the biggest challenge is the very existence of cities themselves. All are by definition densely populated, while green tech by definition is not dense. Squaring that circle even in sunny and windy locations will require massive infrastructure to bridge the gap between dense population patterns and far more dispersed green tech electricity generating systems. Such infrastructure would be on a scale and of a scope that humanity has not yet attempted. The alternative is to empty the cities and unwind 6,000 years of history. Even if solar and wind were equivalent technologies to oil, natural gas, and coal in terms of reliability, decarbonizing the grid would remain a mammoth task. Currently, 38% of global power generation is carbon-free, suggesting we'd only need to roughly triple the good slice to displace the bad. Wrong. Hydropower has already used all available appropriate geographies globally. Nuclear would first need a hell of a PR campaign to sufficiently improve its image. If only solar and wind are doing the lifting, they would need a 9-fold build-out to fully displace fossil fuels. Sixth, even in the geographies where green tech works well, it is, at best, only a partial patch. Green tech only generates electricity. Wind and solar might theoretically be able to replace coal in some specific locations, but electricity of any type is not compatible with existing infrastructure and vehicles that use oil-derived liquid fuels. Such a restriction naturally leads to discussion of electric vehicles as a wholesale replacement for those powered by internal combustion engines. Such is far more difficult than it sounds. The entirety of the global electricity sector generates roughly as much power as liquid transport fuels. Run the math. Switching all transport from internal combustion to electric would necessitate a doubling of humanity's capacity to generate electricity. Again, hydro and nuclear couldn't help, so that 9-fold increase in solar and wind is now a 20-fold increase. Nor are you even remotely done. You now need absolutely massive transmission capacity to link the locations where wind and solar systems can generate power to where that power would ultimately be consumed. In the case of Europe and China, those power lines would have to jump continents. You're also assuming minor little details break your way, such as the wind always